Now we're going to turn to one of the most important and influential state leaders here in California on offshore wind. I'm pleased to introduce you to Jana Ganion, who is Senior Advisor for Offshore Wind in the office of Governor Gavin Newsom. She has worked in the North Coast for many years in leadership roles with Blue Lake Rancheria and other organizations. Please welcome Jana Ganion.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. What an intimate gathering. I'm Jana Ganion. I'm the Senior Advisor for Offshore Wind in the Office of Governor Gavin Newsom. It's my honor to be speaking in the lands of the original peoples of this place, the Nisenan, the Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, the Patwin Windtune, and the people of the Wilton Rancheria, the Shingle Springs Rancheria, the Auburn Rancheria, and other tribal nations, governments, and communities with connections to and stewardship roles in this place, stretching back to time immemorial. We gather here to further shape and deploy offshore floating wind energy and its related sectors, including ports, transmission, ecosystem adaptive management, supply chain, workforce development, and others. And there is an increasing sense of urgency to our work. The first 4 months of this year have seen record annual increases in the amount of atmospheric CO2 emissions. Ralph Keeling, director of UC San Diego Scripps Institution of Oceanography, was quoted recently in The Guardian as, "We aren't just breaking records in CO2 concentrations, but also the record in how fast it is rising." Oceans, which absorb 90% of our CO2 emissions and warming, have seen record and spectacularly high temperatures every single day for over a year. When you have a second, like if I've grown tiresome already, please go to the University of Maine's climatereanalyzer.org and look at the daily sea surface temperature. Last year, a thick orange line, 2023, was off the charts. This year, the thick black line at the top is even worse. And while all this will fluctuate, the clear path forward, the path of strength and ingenuity and equity, our shared mission and responsibility is to reduce and eventually eliminate fossil fuel use, the primary cause of warming in our oceans and air. Fossil fuels have brought benefits, there's no doubt, but they are a grim failure in terms of climate change and localized pollution. So we must thank them for their contributions and bring them to a close as quickly and as manageably as possible. So why is offshore wind worth our collective considerable effort? A few key reasons. The National Renewable Energy Laboratory has done a life cycle analysis of offshore and onshore wind energy and compared it to the other forms of energy that we use. Offshore wind is studied to have approximately 2.7% of emissions generated by natural gas per unit of electricity generated, or 37 times, not percent, times less emissions than natural gas. And this includes carbon from materials, construction, operation, and decommissioning. And these numbers do not yet take into account further carbon reductions that could be brought to bear by zero carbon cement and green steel and other advancements. Offshore wind, if developed responsibly, is a cleaner energy solution at the scale we need to combat the climate emergency. And it's being developed to replace fossil fuels to provide the electricity we need to transition to a zero carbon society. Sorry, menopause moment. Is it hot in here? Okay. Anyone have some ice? Okay. Offshore wind also has the capacity and other capacity factor and other attributes to improve electric reliability and complements other clean energy resources such as solar energy at night and in the winter. It may reduce the output from natural gas generation and in the evening during net peak demand. And because offshore wind requires a bunch of supporting industry, we call it the industry cluster, ports, transmission, ecosystem management, supply chains. It has considerable promise to create high-quality jobs and provide other significant statewide and nationwide socioeconomic benefits. In traveling to the UK and other offshore wind development areas, the career transitions in this space are already happening. People with oil and gas talent and expertise, many of you in this room, are moving into clean energy sectors, and it's great to see. I was in Providence, Rhode Island last year talking with a union worker there at the port, and he had mentioned he'd worked in fossil facilities, and I asked him how the offshore wind work compared, and he said, "Oh, I love it. There's no smell of benzene in the air." California has set bold offshore wind planning goals of 2 to 5 gigawatts by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. The first 5 floating offshore wind leases with sea space that together could generate up to 10 gigawatts of power were fully executed less than a year ago. California is committed to pursuing offshore wind development in a way that is protective of the environment, affordable, equitable, creates a multifaceted benefit stack, and doesn't place disproportionate burdens on host communities or marginalized people. In short, we will not repeat the exploitative and extractive and inequitable resource extraction models of the past. Done responsibly, offshore wind infrastructure can be designed for enhanced ecosystem protection, but this requires increased and long-term monitoring science and research. Recent stated opposition to offshore wind by several tribal nations in California have in good faith pointed to the need for more data to guide decision-making in real time and the methods to answer the questions about ecosystem and species impacts and effects. For offshore wind to be developed responsibly, environmental and cultural resource protections are a top priority, and innovative and robust science, research, technologies, data, including indigenous knowledges, must be developed and applied to shape this new green industry. And luckily, the regions where offshore wind farms, ports, transmission are developing first in California are rural areas with high numbers of tribal nations and with existing science, research, and innovation entities that are already cross-pollinating technology innovations and new startups and populating clean energy companies. These are favorable conditions for increased research and innovation, which is a pillar of very healthy regional economic development. Let's talk about transmission. Electrical transmission upgrades needed for offshore wind offer the potential to also reorganize our grids and co-design for energy equity benefits such as reliability, regional capacity for full electrification and decarbonization, and integration of local distributed energy resources. And I want to just shout out to the California Independent Systems Operator, CAISO. They have published a draft transmission plan that includes projects to support offshore wind integration, so this is in motion. The AB 525 draft strategic plan is published along with supporting reports, and we hope to finalize this summer, and really enormous thanks to all of you in this room have contributed your thought leadership and comments to this strategy and guidance. Implementing California AB 1373, the California Public Utilities Commission and the Department of Water Resources are working incredibly hard to design processes to enable the new central procurement function at the department for the procurement of clean, diverse, long lead time resources that may not be procured on the natural by load-serving entities. This includes offshore wind. California was the first West Coast state to join the Federal State Offshore Wind Implementation Partnership. This is an extension of the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy's Offshore Floating Wind Shot, and it works toward the federal goals of 15 gigawatts of offshore floating wind and a 70% cost reduction by 2035. California also joined the Global Offshore Wind Alliance at COP28. This will lead to international partnerships, policy, technical knowledge exchanges, and probably a bit of co-opetition. We're actively pursuing structures to to better coordinate among tribal, federal, state governments and agencies on planning and deployment, optimizing interagency coordination and permitting, much more to come on that. There's a focus for local content, avoiding local pollution and climate emissions. And here I want to uplift the recent work of the Humboldt Bay Harbor District and the Port of Long Beach and others in California who are moving rapidly to green ports and zero emission facilities. And in all of this development, we must pay careful attention to the most vulnerable among us. We must ensure the safety of our communities, their health and their welfare, including by building the supports we need within those communities like housing, healthcare, childcare, and by preventing missing and murdered Indigenous people, or MMIP, as we onboard new green and maritime industries. As we work together to deliver a version of offshore wind we can all be proud of, designed, deployed with the best available science, traditional ecological knowledges, mission-aligned good actorship on the part of the private sector, that will keep in mind the boom and bust resources extraction cycles that have come before, learn from them, and avoid those same mistakes. We look to the future. In these next few years, the state budget will be highly efficient. We will need increased partnerships with all offshore wind sectors to maintain our pace of equitable deployment. Early investments of bid credits, increased efficiencies, courageous capital, and something that is attendant to any scale-up endeavor, people and entities doing more than what is on paper, and coordination that is built on the values of equity and good faith. I want to end by saying thank you all for your expertise, for your extraordinary efforts to reduce pollution, for workers in these industries, in surrounding communities, and for our shared environment and climate, as we also increase regional and statewide socioeconomic health and equity. In a California for all, we are creating offshore wind for all. Thank you.